On this episode, we will begin taking apart the Gamecube and keeping only the necessary components. The idea here is to rework the Gamecube to make it fit in a much smaller case. So we will try to remove as many unused parts and connectors as we can. The top lid is the hardest part to take off of the Gamecube. There are 4 proprietary Nintendo screws securing it. When the lid is removed, you can get a pretty good look at all the parts. The power comes in through the back and feeds the fan and the Gamecube. Remove all the screws to take off the fan housing and the DVD drive. You can see for yourself that even though the DVDs were small, this drive is quite thick. It takes most of the space inside the Gamecube, and that's why we need to get rid of it. Adding a mod chip allows us to boot games from an SD card. It renders the DVD drive useless. Underneath the drive is the motherboard. It is the core of the Gamecube, and basically the only part we need. The Gamecube is built as a board with smaller extension boards for the drive, controllers, and so on. This is a good thing because you can bypass those and cut off the connectors to be left with a very tiny Gamecube motherboard. Removing the remaining screws reveals the voltage regulation board. It distributes different voltages to different parts of the motherboard. You'll either need to keep this board or replace it with one of your own making. To simplify here, we will use this original board. To sum up, we will only be keeping the motherboard and voltage regulator inside our portable. However, the motherboard will not fit as it is. You'll need to cut off unused portions of the circuit to make it fit the case. There are many different approaches. Some parts you can cut without having to fix anything. Some parts you can cut because they just feed wires to other parts, and you can just solder directly to the wires. However, there are some parts you could cut, but you would have to relocate the components. That's definitely harder. The cut shown here is pretty safe and only subtracts parts that are easy to fix. Check references to decide what to cut. You can cut the board with a Dremel or a saw. Either way, make sure you don't scratch the surface of the board. After everything is cut, make sure to sand the edges of the board to avoid shorting it. And there we go, the Gamecube actually fits in our case. Until now, we didn't treat the issue of cooling. The Gamecube needs a heatsink and a fan to function. The stock heatsink and fan configuration is pretty large, so let's try to trim that also. By replacing the stock fan with slimmer ones, we can integrate them in the heatsink for more airflow. We can also trim the fins themselves to lower the thickness. The idea here is to cut just enough. Every piece of aluminum helps in cooling, so make sure you don't mess up when cutting. Using a saw here might seem a little more tedious, but actually it's probably more precise. The fan walls are also being cut off to ensure the air flows through the nearby heatsink fins. The fans are glued in with superglue and epoxy to resist the heat. Now we just need to set the heatsink back on the Gamecube and secure it with nuts and bolts. To bring the Gamecube back to life, we need to feed it power, so let's connect it to its daughter board. This board takes in 12 volts and converts it into 5 volts, 3.3 volts, and 1.9 volts. Let's just connect the 12 volts line to a Gamecube connector and feed 3.3 and 1.9 volts back to the Gamecube. The 5 volts line is only used for the controllers and isn't required to turn on the Gamecube. Use some thick wires for power lines. Computer power supply cables work just fine. Finally, let's find the trace that outputs video and connect it to our screen to see if the Gamecube turns on. And there you have it. The Gamecube has been successfully cut apart while remaining functional. For the next steps, we will solder more parts to it and finish up on the case. Hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe and check the links in the description. Trimming a motherboard isn't hard, but you must check what you can cut beforehand. Actual references and guides can be found on various websites including Mod Retro, GC Forever, and more.